Hi, and welcome to Willow Roundtable Discussions. Willow is an events-driven community where industry experts and entrepreneurs can come together in social settings and share the latest intelligence in cutting-edge technology and investment opportunities. Our group discussion starts now. Thanks everyone for coming. There's all these new faces that I haven't seen before and like a completely different crowd than what we had last week. So cool. And thank you, Mox, for letting us host this fireside chat without the fire at Mox. So thank you, Mox, and thanks everyone for coming. I'd like to give the speakers of today a very warm welcome, starting with Alex. Thank you for being here and maybe an intro for yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Amber. I'm Alex Liu. I run Maicoin, which is the longest running and largest exchange here in Taiwan.
Awesome. I think you really need no introductions. How about you, Peter?
My name is Peter Wong. I work at a well-known crypto exchange in compliance. It sounds like Bitphoenix, and we have a well-known stable coin.
People are supposed to laugh. That was a joke.
Cue the laughter, yeah.
Yeah. I think there's a sound on the button. We'll add that later. How about Andrew?
Hi, my name's Andrew Lin. I'm a U.S. attorney. Just kind of a personal investor in crypto and intrigued by the space. And just here to contribute some of my opinions from a legal standpoint.
It's always important when you're doing crypto events. And Kelvin?
Hey everyone, my name is Calvin Shen. I work for a digital asset custodian called Hex Trust, based in Asia.
Awesome. So thank you, all of our lovely speakers. So let's get the conversation started with what's been in the news last week about Coinbase's IPO. I know you guys have had a lot of discussions on this topic, but what are the thoughts of it? And do you think that this kind of signifies the top of this bull market, or is there room for further growth? Like in the crypto space, what does it mean? And what have you been saying to all the people that have been asking? Maybe start with Alex.
Right. I mean, Coinbase being the Maicoin of the United States, I'm really happy to see them
Nice.
achieve this milestone there. Obviously, it's a good thing for all of us, even if you're a hater and you got a mouthful of sour grapes, but undeniably, it's a good thing for the industry. I was a bit dismayed to see so many insiders selling at the top, and they kind of brought down the Bitcoin price, I believe. To your question, Amber, I think there's room to grow, to go rather. There's quite a bit of headroom for the Bitcoin price, where does that come? That observation come from? I just think the money printing that started March of last year. I mean, it's yet to abate. It's going at about 200 billion a month, and until that really begins to slow down, I just think that inflation's there, whether you want to see it or not, and it will also inflate the price of Bitcoin, among other things.
Cool. What about you, Peter? You seem to do a lot of trading.
Yeah. I think the analogy I heard with Coinbase is that this could be the next Netscape moment. For those that are old enough to remember the dot-com period. The dot-com period, I mean, like the Mark Twain quote, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. Like right now, I feel like we're in the middle of a bull run, which probably would be analogous to like 1999. So if you guys remember the dot-com period, that was pretty crazy. And, with DeFi and all that kind of stuff, I think we're entering a new phase right now.
What about you, Kelvin? Is this a good time for you?
Well, for a custodian, absolutely, right? As we typically derive fees from asset side. So yes, it's not a bad time for a custodian. But typically, with these IPOs, especially with blockbuster like Coinbase being kind of the flagship IPO first of its kind in the industry, the investment bankers typically, or the banking bankers involved typically time the process quite well. I mean, the IPO is typically usually at the top. So I think about things like Facebook, for example, right? You start out high after IPO, and you can follow a kind of a dip, maybe even a big dip. But having said that, the overall longer-term trajectory tends to be more upwards on a longer-term perspective. So I feel like this could be another one of that moment.
I think Coinbase going public, I think it's good. It's kind of like Alex said for the industry in general. I think it allows people who haven't known what's been going on with crypto to kind of be more aware of it, just because it's such a high publicity thing. I think insider selling, I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing. I kind of see it as, a lot of them have worked a long time in this. It's a way for them to kind of get their payout for years of work. And I'm sure, plenty of them still have a lot of options involved. So doesn't mean that they're completely out of this. And I think if most of you guys probably know who Ark is and Kathy Wood, and if it's any indication, she's been buying a lot of Coinbase. So, yeah.
Interesting. I think everyone wants to know, with Maicoin and so many other exchanges popping up, do you think that there's a bit of a competitive pressure to lower their fees in the future? Is that something retailers will expect?
We've experienced, price and margin compression for the last many years, so that's not a new phenomenon. But for me, as long as the addressable market continues to grow, just a figure that I'll share with you folks is, we're adding, anywhere from 400 to 600 users a day, and that's simply here in Taiwan, right? So if the pie continues to grow, the fees can come down, and we're going to still be doing just fine. So
I'm also wondering, I think a bunch of us on the stage here, except for me, are American citizens, and a bunch of us are, living in Taiwan. What do you need to set up a Maicoin account here in Taiwan?
An ARC will do. If you're able to open a Taiwan bank account, then you can have an account with us.
There was supposed to be someone talking about ETFs here, so I'm just wondering if anyone has a thought on that, if we're going to see one for Taiwan or even in the U.S. in the future. Maybe who wants to take that?
Sure, I'll try and take a stab at it, but we do have a lawyer here who will probably shed a lot more light on that. But so for background, right, I cover custody from Asia Pacific perspective. So obviously we know that the market, is notably missing, at least the U.S. is notably missing a Bitcoin ETF, right? But we know about Prosper in Canada. We know about the ones in Europe. It's missing in Asia Pacific as well. But what I can tell you is that most of certainly our clients, they're now getting regulatory approval for Bitcoin funds, right? So the funds are tailored to accredited investors only as well as institutional investors. So clearly the retail piece that's missing, which is what the ETF is trying to solve. With respect to the regulator, at least in Hong Kong SSC or the Singapore MAS, what they typically look for is kind of follow the leader with respect to the US SEC. So for sure that there's absolute market demand from issuers that are looking to launch this Bitcoin ETF in Asia Pacific. But obviously, I think the headwind is coming from a regulatory approval or friendliness with that respect. And I think once and if and when the US SEC does allow the first Bitcoin ETF in the States, I don't think the Hong Kong issuers or the Singapore issuer will be that far behind.
Maybe I can ask you, but what do you think will be the difference from retail customers buying directly on an exchange and through the ETF? Will this make things easier, Andrew?
I think, first off, the SEC, there's been a lot of applications to the SEC wanting a property ETF, and I'm sure most of you guys who trade know that there's other proxies. If you don't want to buy Bitcoin or cryptocurrency directly, there's other proxies through the U.S. markets to be involved, whether it be Grayscale, GBTC, or MicroStrategy, MSTR, or even more indirect plays like Square, PayPal, Tesla, or if you want to just be involved in miners, things like that. I think the SEC obviously is going to take steps to look very seriously at a proper ETF, just because the new chair that they have in place now, Gary Gensler, he's more or less a pro crypto kind of guy. He's very familiar with it, taught courses at MIT on blockchain. So it's different than his predecessors for sure. So I think, it's probably just a matter of time, not a question of if at this point. But the SEC is historically slow moving, so it takes time. There's a lot of procedures involved. A lot of people, I think Winklevoss, Gemini, they tried to file for an ETF like 7-8 years ago. That got declined. A lot of people have tried, got declined, and it's not a cheap process. So people try it. Obviously, it can be very profitable if they can get a proper ETF, but people kind of get discouraged because of the time and the cost, and sometimes they just withdraw applications, especially if they know the outcome is just going to be a denial. But I think the ETF obviously will bring more exposure to the market in general, and hopefully some sort of protection. Just because some people, they don't want to buy Bitcoin directly, they don't want to worry about custody issues. How do I store it? How do I protect getting hacked? How do I, I don't know how to use a cold wallet. What's a cold wallet? What's a hot wallet? Things like this. So, ETF maybe makes it easier for your general retail investor. Obviously, there's other issues involved with, what is an ETF? Are you really owning the Bitcoin? What exactly are you owning with the ETF? But that's a different topic. Yeah.
Did you want to make a comment on the custody side, or no? You're good.
Yeah, no, I mean, with all application with respect to regulators, whether it's ETF or a fund or basically anytime you want to be regulated, I can assure you that one of the big section on the application is going to be how do you keep client assets? How do you keep them safe? And so, that is one problem. I mean, that's part of the reason why, independent custodians like us exist, right? To provide institutional grade custody to really satisfy the regulators and to assure third party, clients that their assets will be protected by independent third parties. So ETF is no exceptions. You can go on the prospectus, look at the filing, that you'll see that there's absolutely third-party, custodians being appointed, and some of the process are, very well crafted and thought out, with response to what the regulators are looking for.
Cool. Let's go back to some compliance. What do you think coins from illegitimate sources? How do you deal with this problem, and from exchange or stablecoin experience? Maybe Peter first.
All right. Well, one thing I was going to say is, from a trader's perspective, a U.S. listed ETF could be like a top, just a buy the rumor, sell the news type of event. But it'll probably be probably 6 months or so out. That's kind of my projection on how long this bull market will run. From a compliance point of view, the company I work for, we're offshore, we're unregulated, but we're trying to stay ahead of regulation. Obviously, the U.S. is the big dog in terms of, they set the standard on who can operate and who is going to be a problem in the future. So, we're trying to stay ahead by, spending a lot of money on our compliance, making sure we do background checks on people. And obviously, anybody with a criminal record is going to be probably kicked off our platform. So, we're trying to be proactive about it instead of waiting for regulators to tell us what we can and cannot do. We're trying to have standards so that when regulators do come, we have the information available for them.
Did you want to add something from a BitMEX point of view, or you want to save that for later, William?
All right, now we're in.
So the regulators came. My name is William, and I've been a Bitcoin investor since 2015. Equity side, not actual coin. But I would say the challenge is that the regulators want, and in my view, personal view, not the view of BitMEX, is just that they were looking to make a point, and it was not just like a regulator, but there was multiple. The Attorney General of Southern New York was on a warpath. And then the Commodities Trade, CFTC also wanted to make a point. The problem is they might have tried to make 2 points at the same time, which in America doesn't work too well. So we'll see whether they whether they overreach themselves. But seriously, they if you look at the citizenship of all the major crypto exchanges in the world, they picked the one with 2 Americans, right? So that's the easy one. And also the one with a very outspoken and kind of reputation, which is my friend Arthur. So we'll see what happens. But I think that in terms of regulatory, we have a new CEO at BitMEX. He came from a totally licensed, but also crypto-friendly, NFT-friendly exchange in Stuttgart in Germany. And I think, whether the U.S. regulatory group as it is, I think the message was at least received by BitMEX Group in that they're going to be more, very much regulatory friendly. Because I think my personal opinion is that you definitely need to have that friendliness going on. There are a lot of people who have a huge amount of influence on the regulators whose businesses are going to get severely impacted in a negative way by blockchain and crypto, i.e. traditional financial institutions. So there needs to be a balance. And so, yeah, our guys got smacked, and you guys should all learn from it. But I wouldn't say don't stop. Just hide under the bush.
Awesome, Alex. Do you have something to add?
Yeah, I mean, first off, I don't think they're done smacking. So I can't, see any scenario under which, Arthur and company and let's say the folks at Ripple are the last target of the SEC and or CFTC. I think it doesn't take a huge imagination to say that the U.S. regulators and law enforcement entities see the world as their playground. So I don't think we're done there. But going back to the cautious optimism I heard around ETFs, I agree that with Gary Gensler at the SEC and the Winklevoss twins, applying many years ago as they did versus Fidelity applying a month ago, I think it's a different ballgame. So I would say, that's another reason why I'm not calling the top of the market. That's something I share with Peter. Your question about like dirty coins and so forth, well, I don't know, talk both sides of the book, right? I mean, you hear Peter Thiel saying Bitcoin's a Chinese financial weapon, and then on the other side saying, hey, Palantir can help, So I would say learn from Peter Thiel. So talk both sides of the book. So frankly, that's what I think this symbiotic thing going on between Silicon Valley and Wall Street on Bitcoin, right? Like the Wall Street guys, when the money printing's going on, they're having a good time, right? And then Silicon Valley can say, well, I can do something against inflation, and we have another go at it. So that's why I'm actually overall optimistic about yes, there are vested interests who are going to be negatively affected by what we're talking about tonight. But on the whole, I think there's enough ways to cut everybody in on the deal whereby, the party will continue, is what I'm trying to say.
Cool. I just got a message that there's a Liz from Ripple here. Maybe she wants to come and join us closer to the stage.
Hey, Liz. We're talking about you guys getting smacked. Yeah.
If you want to come, please grab a seat in the front. This is funny for me because usually I'm on panels, and when I mention, the whole reg questions, people cringe. It's usually with a bunch of Bitcoin maximalists. But let's talk a bit about the regulation space in Taiwan and bring it back to Taiwan. And how should regulations be to make it better for the crypto ecosystem here and possibly worldwide, or even thoughts on a central bank digital currency? Let's start. I think we should start with Taiwan. Let's start with Alex.
Well, I was told many years ago by none other authority than the senior fellow at AppWorks not to start my business here in Taiwan, because when I told him in 2013 about what I planned to do, he said, you're much better off in Singapore and Hong Kong. And here we are 8 years on, and I can see his point. I mean, our regulator here... Finally. Our regulator here... I think a lot of it just stems from, not having English as their first language, having a continental legal system as opposed to common law, etc. But what I was going to say actually is that a business like ours could actually not have grown up in the last 8 years in Hong Kong nor in Singapore. The fact that we can add 400 to 600 retail folks every day that have more or less unfettered access to their bank accounts. You can transfer 2 million Taiwan dollars a day into crypto if you so wish. This is simply not allowed in Hong Kong, where only professional investors are allowed. In Singapore, it's allowed in a very constricted way, where you can, via a third-party payment processor, buy 1,000 Sing dollar per day. Okay, so the point I'm trying to make here is that on the surface, Taiwan is not certainly not your first. It may not even be a logical choice to do a business like ours. But underneath it all, if you can find your niche, Taiwan could be among the best places in Asia, or at the very least in the Chinese-speaking world. How do we extrapolate this to other things that we may want to consider, whether it's security tokens or DeFi or name your acronym, okay? I suspect that there's a path there that you can carve out. But again, don't take the conventional wisdom or your knee-jerk reaction that if you do this type of thing, you're better off somewhere else in Asia or somewhere else in the world. I would give Taiwan a second look, but it needs to be an intelligent look. It can't just be searching in the dark for something like that.
Since like Coinbase is the Maicoin of the U.S., do you feel that like there's an IPO in the future in Taiwan, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, the local capital market, I don't think would support a company like ours. So yes, we are looking at listing elsewhere. I think Coinbase is a nice, template for us. I mean, we're a scaled down version of Coinbase, and so I'm thankful for Coinbase for blazing this path. So yes, I think to the extent that it benefits us reputationally, of course, from a balance sheet perspective and otherwise, and for our investors' liquidity, of course. Yes, I think a public listing somewhere on the planet makes sense for us.
Peter, let's bring it back to your stablecoin and regulations in Taiwan.
Well, since we're unregulated, we can kind of operate in many jurisdictions. Obviously, our big problem is we have something that correlates with the U.S. dollar, and there's always that fear that the hammer comes down from U.S. regulators. And we actually just settled a lawsuit recently, which was a big moment for us because having that legal issue hovering over our company was a big problem. But in terms of Taiwan specifically, I mean, like our product is used all over the world. Where our stable coin is heavily used in Asia specifically. And the reason we put it out from the beginning was because banking relationships were difficult to get. I mean, if you see the blowback from a lot of traditional finance, and especially from the banks, is less so now, but probably 4 or 5 years ago, banks just generally didn't want to work with crypto companies. So we had to set up other alternative means, and having a stable coin is one of those ways of going about it.
Yeah, so we're headquartered in Hong Kong, but that's just purely because our co-founders are from Hong Kong. Our kind of first expansion beyond Hong Kong, we selected Singapore, and part of the reason is because there's actually regulatory clarity from Singapore with the new Payment Services Act out there, and also with how kind of supportive the Monetary Authority of Singapore is with respect to emerging technologies. So, for example, they would offer sandbox environment for startups to try things out under kind of in a sandbox environment, try things out. Don't be afraid to break things and try it out under the watchful eyes of regulators. So programs like this really encourage startups to try and scale up and test their product all under, and be regulated at the same time. And, if you exit the sandbox, you kind of get the full license based on, whichever product they're using. So, this is one example of how the regulators, especially with respect to crypto, right, or digital assets, that a lot of the regulatory clarity is still missing. It's getting a little bit more from reputable jurisdictions globally, but still, we're not there yet. So I think that Taiwan probably has or maybe had the opportunity, I don't know if it's past tense or still have the opportunity to provide some type of jurisdiction-friendly environment to attract crypto talent or business to Taiwan. But that's part of the reason why we set up shop in Singapore, not to mention the client demands are very robust out of the Singapore entity. For me personally, obviously, I do understand the tech talent here in Taiwan. So, for us, what I'm only looking at right now is to potentially looking at tech talent for developers. But from a business perspective, it just doesn't seem like I have the right incentive or the understanding or the support from the local regulators to entice me to open an office here. But I could be wrong about that. Comments on that?
You guys feel free to interject and have a comment to whatever anyone's saying. Andrew, did you want to add? Or
I think in general, regulations in theory they're trying to protect investors, right? What the SEC tries to do is to protect investors that maybe don't know any better. They're not so-called your high net wealth or accredited investors. You kind of get these words thrown around. But sometimes it comes at a balance, right? You want to regulate, but you don't want to overregulate too. Sometimes when you overregulate, then it kind of stops innovation. They don't want to come up with new products just because they know that it comes at a high cost. It comes with a burden of registering if you're trying to offer a security, if you're trading a security, etc. So I think with the pace that cryptocurrency has moved, especially in the last year or two, I think governments are kind of rushing to figure out how exactly they are to regulate this space. And sometimes it's also hard when the regulators themselves don't understand the industry. I think that's a major advantage that hopefully the SEC has with the new chair that we mentioned. I'm not sure, whether the individuals involved in Taiwan or other regulatory bodies throughout the world have backgrounds in blockchain and cryptocurrency, because this will serve for sure useful in how exactly they will regulate things like money laundering, how they will regulate how is cryptocurrency considered a security, or do you have to register security and things like this.
Cool. What do you guys think of the adoption curve towards cryptocurrency? Maicoin, Alex, you've been saying you guys have like quite a few new users every single day. What are your projections for the next few years? What are events that would accelerate this growth, or what could happen that it would just die down completely? Who wants to take this first? Maybe Peter.
I think in technology, one of the adoption curves that people look at is the S curve. I don't know if you guys have seen like the S curve, but it starts out slowly and then accelerates, and I feel like we're in the process of that acceleration right now. But over time, probably like 4 or 5 years from now, it'll mature and it'll stabilize. But I feel like right now is probably one of the most dynamic periods in the last couple of years. There's a lot more integration, a lot more growth from the crypto space. And I feel like traditional finance is entering the space and, probably looking to buy up some companies, exchanges, all this kind of stuff. I mean, like right now with DeFi, you're creating an entirely different parallel financial system. And, I think over time, these two systems will integrate and merge.
My opinion is that personally speaking, I'm more bullish about digital asset more than ever. And digital asset, it's all encompassing. It could be obviously crypto, but it could be security tokens. It could be NFTs. It could be digital bonds. You can tokenize that printer if you wanted
Someone
to,
sent in
right?
a fax, right?
It's everything is tokenizable, right? So, one thing that I observed from my seat, 3 years ago, I wanted to talk to the banks, big banks, think Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan. They wouldn't take meetings with me. 2 years ago, okay, they started taking meetings, but say, okay, we'll look at it and we'll get back to you. 6 months later, just maybe a follow-up meeting every 6 months, every quarter, whatever. A year ago, we're starting to get to demo, and I see some POCs out there, okay? And then finally, 6 months ago, you actually see some of these banks actually starting to get into the market, right? So there are public announcements like from Goldman Sachs, obviously J.P. Morgan, DBS is launching in Singapore, Standard Chartered, they're doing something, ING is doing their own thing, HSBC, and all the bulge bracket names that you probably recognize. They're in various stages of getting into this market, whether it's tokenization, whether that's trade finance, or offering currency services like buy and sell Bitcoin for the wealth management clients. So either way, from our seat, I'm more optimistic than ever that the big institutional guys are finally coming. I know we've been saying that since 2017, right? It's the big institutional money, but I'm actually seeing actual tractions from these guys to make me believe that they're quite serious about it this time around. Having said that, though, if there's a 50% correction or drawdown in the next 12 months, very likely the board could just say, you know what, let's put a pause on this whole crypto project and evaluate. So that certainly could still be the case in the future.
I think adoption is going to come with mainstream kind of popularity. People want to buy Bitcoin or buy cryptocurrency if they see like, oh, I can make money from it, or I can make money and it's easy to invest in it. But if you give them a lot of hurdles to invest, or they see like, oh, this is just a fad, or this is a scam, people get afraid to invest in things like this, just because I'm sure plenty of people are aware, like, how crypto or Bitcoin, kind of went from nothing to 20,000 a few years back, and then kind of went back to nothing. And they're like, "Oh, see, it's just a whole scam." And then you hear it a lot in the media. You hear it with a lot of whether it be politicians or big bankers, things like this. So you still have a lot of people that are unsure about this, whether they want to invest in this. But you see more and more, with guys like Square and PayPal allowing investment of Bitcoin on their platform and using it on their platform. It makes it easier for a normal retail investor to do this. Even I saw one of Alex's retail shops. When I walked in, I saw a bunch of middle-aged moms signing up for accounts. So, this isn't your typical crowd that you would think, wants to buy Bitcoin or cryptocurrency. So you see that, people are hearing about this, obviously because of how much it's grown, how much people are making from this, and when people see this, then they kind of want to get involved because they want to make money too. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, anecdotes like what Andrew said. I mean, our users for the first 7 years of our existence were primarily young, male, and then in the last 6 months, all of a sudden, you get all these aunties, and they're the ones with the money, in case you didn't know that. No, I want to point something out in case we lose sight of it, that like Bitcoin and I suppose our industry hasn't really come up with anything new in the last 12 to 18 months. I think we lose sight, on the other hand, of how batshit crazy our world has become in the same amount of time. If I told you at the beginning of 2020 that within a few months, 80% of the airplanes in the world would stop flying, would you have believed me? If I told you at the beginning of 2020 that, within 12 months, the U.S. Capitol would be stormed and that a peaceful transition of power was not an assured thing in the United States, would you have believed me? If I told you at the beginning of 2020 that, the Fed's balance sheet would go from $4 trillion to $7 trillion, everybody would get helicopter money of whatever it was, $1,200, $1,400, you probably wouldn't have believed me. But all of these things objectively happened in the last 18 months. And in comparison, relatively, I suppose, crypto no longer looks so batshit crazy.
I feel like if you're in Taiwan, like none of that really happened. It seems so far. Like I have people like, oh, what's COVID? I've heard of it. I saw it on the newspaper, but like my life isn't affected.
So I don't think Bitcoin did anything in the last 12 to 18 months. I think the US dollar just became a lot shakier. And that's why we're at 60 grand or whatever the number is today. And people are not blinking. They're like, yeah, that's the way things should be. That's why we get the antis in our shop, right? So.
Well, I'd also like to add to that I think there has been some improvements. Like, let's say Ethereum, like 4 years ago, it was crypto kitties, and there wasn't a whole lot more than that. And now you've got like 40 billion, 50 billion in DeFi, those are huge numbers that happened probably in the last 12 months. So, I mean, there's a lot of adoption that's going on.
Yeah, I'm not saying we're not doing anything. I'm just saying the world has gotten significantly, immeasurably crazier in this time, and then crypto doesn't look so crazy anymore.
People are still managing companies, going to work, right?
Sure, raising families, et cetera.
I think, Alex, I've heard you're very excited about your environmental efforts. And before I get to that, I just want to ask you a question. Bitcoin has been heavily criticized for being wasteful in energy and contributing to a global climate crisis. There are others, though, that say that it is net positive towards a carbon neutral future as Bitcoin miners will accelerate the clean energy trend. What are your thoughts on this?
I mean, let's just look at the numbers. Objectively, mining sucks up a lot of electricity. There's a carbon footprint associated with that. There's no doubt about that. I'm not going to get into the relativistic arguments about, look at HSBC's, carbon footprint, all those trucks pushing cash around their ATMs. No, let's just drop it. Running a blockchain requires energy and it emits carbon, full stop. What I'd like to do instead is actually try to draw maybe a more abstract observation, which is what have we achieved in the last decade or so? I think what we've done, and maybe it's an open question, this is applicable to the carbon pollution problem, is what we've done is using cryptography, we've rewarded private parties for solving some type of failure of the commons, right? So the common failure was if I wanted to transact something financially, the banks weren't doing it for me, the payment processors weren't doing it for me. If I wanted to program my own money, the central banks were certainly not doing it for me. Now we have a way of doing that. And so the public good, the common, literally the public good that has been created has been this ledger that's more or less open for anybody to use. Reward miners, which are private parties with their own P&L, to maintain this ledger for us. Let's talk about carbon pollution. I'll argue that that is also failure of the commons, right? We each emit carbon. We're doing it here, breathing, right? And we believe it's changing our environment in undesirable ways. The question is, can this blockchain technology, this token thing, can we use it in a way that rewards private, either individuals or entities, in the same way we reward miners, for doing something that is desirable, which is either to emit less or not emit at all, or in the best case, remove carbon from the atmosphere. And years ago, I grew up in California, so I watched very closely as the environment that I know and love, which is the Sierra Nevada. I go there to hike in the summer, and I go there to ski in the winter. In my adult lifetime, I can see it changing. And so I care about this just as a personal thing, but the business that I chose to start 7 or 8 years ago, even then I noticed that there was something related about these two topics. Okay, so it's an open question. We're exploring this with some of our friends. Can we apply this tokenization to create a reward and perhaps punishment system, right, for, again, individuals and entities that behave in the way that we would like to encourage, which again is to be on the net reduction side for carbon emissions. And I suspect that there is, okay? I don't have it cut and dry yet for me to present to you here tonight, but I suspect that there is. That's my take on this relationship between carbon and blockchain. There is a relationship because blockchain creates carbon, but I'm hoping that down the road that we can turn it around and have blockchain do something better for carbon.
Is this something you're working on at the moment? Or?
It is. So Ping and Joe and some folks, some of our friends around the world, especially in Europe, we're trying to apply this in a meaningful way in the so-called voluntary carbon market. So a 30-second tutorial on carbon markets, right? So the biggest carbon market in the world is in Europe. It's called the ETS. That came about because there were regulations that were passed circa 2005, namely an emissions cap, and in some jurisdictions, a tax. That's called the compliance market. That's what this shindig called the Congress of Parties under the United Nations, what they get together every year to talk about, very unsuccessfully, I should add, after 25 years of this. What we're focused on is the so-called voluntary market, where corporations, let's say Apple, they promise that by 2030 their supply chain will be carbon neutral. They do this voluntarily, and we want to match them with voluntary suppliers of carbon. So it could be an Indonesian farmer that doesn't cut down his forests, for instance, or, of course, guys like Ørsted, which build wind farms. So we believe that matches the characteristics of the token market, and so that's what we're trying to kickstart here.
Cool. Joe, did you want to say something on that, or are you cool?
Hi, everybody. My name is Joe Russell. I am a technology lead for Tom Steyer. He is a climate activist, former presidential campaign, if any of y'all pay attention.
I had no idea that was her title. That's cool.
And Tom has, since he signed the Giving Pledge some 10 years ago with other high-net philanthropists, one of his top line items is climate change awareness. He's had an angle, obviously, in the forefront of American politics, and he's gone on public record recently with recognizing the opportunity in the crypto space with the accord he recently signed with. And Alex is just right in that lane. You know, that there's certainly an opportunity to bring voluntary carbon credits in a fraud-free opportunity for tracking and seeing that, you know, people can trust that this is a way that they can, you know, participate in a way to try to just recognize that climate is something that everybody wants to pay attention.
Thank you. I just totally put you on the spot, but thank you for sharing, Joe.
Sure.
Does anyone else have a comment on this carbon issue on the stage?
I'll add one last thing. I wear a Garmin watch, so it helps me. It reminds me of this thing called fitness. I may not have the highest fidelity to the concept, but like it reminds me every day that there is a concept. And that's what I will say about voluntary carbon. It's not going to solve the problem for us. Okay, I suspect as most human how human incentives work. If you think about your own New Year's resolutions, right? We start the year off nice and strong, and then we probably forget about it for 9 months before we try to make a Hail Mary effort, around Thanksgiving, right? So I think it's going to be this way around climate change. We'll say and even do certain nice things, but it won't get real until, literally the forests, well, they already are burning, but maybe when the locusts come and we don't have water and food and so forth, and then we'll get serious. And that's when the compliance markets will kick in. But before that, I liken the voluntary markets to my Garmin watch. It's like a nice way to measure progress, and it may even help in some ways, but let's not pretend that it's going to solve the problem.
Cool, thank you. Anyone else?
I mean, in general, yeah, the EPA, they're guys you don't want to mess with. So if they got some issues with kind of environmental things and with mining and Bitcoin, which I'm not super familiar with, you want to be in compliance with them because they'll give you a lot of trouble if you're not.
I think Peter had some questions that he wanted to talk amongst you guys. So maybe you guys have any questions for each other?
One topic I'd like to talk about is MicroStrategy and some of the corporate treasuries for Bitcoin. I was just wondering if you guys had any comments on how that helps with adoption and moving forward with crypto and traditional finance.
Yeah, so I think with the whole microsailor and MicroStrategy, right, converting cash on the balance sheet to Bitcoin, I think it's kind of a watershed moment to say that, okay, look, now we finally have Fortune 500 companies willing to view Bitcoin as a storage value, which has been the rhetoric by digital natives for the longest time, right? So that really kind of led off, a trickle of events afterwards, right? So you obviously you have Tesla with Elon Musk there, Maicoin in Hong Kong, Mass Mutual, which is a really conservative Boston-based insurance company, right? Via regular vehicle which is using NYDIG out of New York. So the idea here is that now you have crypto is now finally going to the mainstream, right? You have big, Fortune 500 reputable corporate treasuries who's supposed to be, who's public companies, financials being audited by compliance, the big fours, all that regulated ways, and they're actually okay with doing that. So now all of a sudden, if I were to talk with my parents about Bitcoin 2017, they'd probably ignore me. But now if I say things like, okay, look, you have all these, big companies buying this Bitcoin, I think this will be a much more kind of valid argument that this is now actually becoming a truly asset class that people can invest in, whether it's for storage of value or speculation. And the trickle-on effect from that is, how do you get this exposure? Right, so MicroStrategy, they bought Bitcoin, so they just loaned Bitcoin. Okay, sure, they go on exchange, they went through Maicoin, bought some BTC, that's great. Or with Mass Mutual, they did it through a regulated vehicle, which is through NYDIG. And I'm sure there are other out there with Grayscale. I think it's already one of the selectable fund options in the IRA accounts for individuals and retirees, right? So I think it's one of the top 10 tradable tickers. So the question is, okay, well, clearly these vehicles are now being used for for adoption. What's next, right? So I think that kind of leads the question to, could ETF be next? Question mark.
Yeah, I think with specifically to MicroStrategy, I think just kind of like we've been discussing, generally speaking, it's allowing the general public to see this adoption a lot more, and whether or not you want to believe it, if Saylor had an influence on Elon to put Bitcoin on their balance sheets, yes or no. But in any case, Tesla has it on their balance sheets now. Obviously, the payment terminals, like I mentioned before, Square, PayPal, they have it on their balance sheets too. Grayscale, obviously, running as a trust, they have a large amount on their balance sheets. So it becomes a question of, are these guys, right? And if you're a publicly traded company now, and with cash reserves in your treasury, are you going to be falling behind if you don't have any Bitcoin? And if the dollar keeps on depreciating, which some people think it might because of all the money printing and possible inflation and things like this, It just becomes a question of, do we adopt Bitcoin on our balance sheets, and how do we go about doing this? Because it's not as easy for them to just be like, okay, let's just buy Bitcoin. I think there's a lot of approvals they need to go through, shareholders, board of directors, regulatory approvals, etc. So in general, I think it gives more credibility to Bitcoin, because mainly they're buying Bitcoin, they're not buying other cryptocurrencies. It gives more credibility to Bitcoin. I think as a retail investor, when you see all these big companies buying it, you feel like, okay, maybe it's for real this time. But in terms of you wanting to get exposure by investing in MicroStrategy because they have Bitcoin and using it as your proxy to invest in Bitcoin, I think that is another topic that you kind of have to research, because I'm not sure they are probably the best vehicle for investing in Bitcoin at this moment.
A little perspective on Bitcoin is Bitcoin's a little over a trillion market cap right now. Gold is about 10, 11 trillion. Global equities, probably 100 trillion. What else? Global wealth is probably 400 trillion. So if you say 1% of global wealth at 400 trillion, and Bitcoin could 4x from there if you use that litmus test. If you look at it as a replacement for gold, that's at 10 trillion. So there's still a lot of upside possible. Whether that happens or not, we'll see. But, it's still really early on in this game.
So DeFi is an exciting phenomenon driving rapid innovation across blockchain and finance. Let's switch the topic a bit. What is your view around the value of ERC tokens associated with these projects, or maybe some views on Ethereum, competitor blockchains? Maybe starting with, who wants to start? Calvin? I don't know.
Sure, yeah. So obviously, I think this is one of the major, call it headwinds with blockchain, or at least token adoption, right? It's basically every chain for themselves. Obviously, Ethereum being the first one with smart contract, they're kind of the king in this field for the time being. But that also caused the problem of gas fee being very, very high right at the moment, right? So that's why you have all these competitor chains coming out. I mean, we were briefly talking about BSC or Binance Smart Chain before the call, but there are obviously the likes of Polkadot, interoperability. There are other ones like Solana. And many other ones in proof of stake kind of chains in the marketplace. All of this is really, in my opinion, a headwind to mass adoption, because it kind of brings confusion to developers on, okay, well, shoot, which blockchain am I supposed to develop on, right? So, and that's just part of the game, that these foundations are trying to build market shares because they believe in blockchain technology in the future. Having said that, clearly with the rise of DeFi summer last year, and then you have the NFT craze, which is still largely built on Ethereum blockchain. You have Flow that's trying to from Dapper Lab, trying to disrupt trying to take over the NFT market. DeFi still mostly ERC, Ethereum based, ERC20 based tokens. So the reality is, until we can kind of solve the issue, makes it more scalable. Obviously, that's why E 2.0 is in progress. I think all of this different competition will hinder the adoption until a mass consolidation will occur sometime in the future.
What about like Taiwan? Do you feel DeFi Taiwan's a good place for DeFi, and you're gonna start listing DeFi tokens?
We've listed a few. I wouldn't say Taiwan's a particularly great place for DeFi, but I wouldn't say any place in particular is a great place for DeFi. It's wherever you want to be. And if Taiwan's the place you want to be, then that's the place for you. Theoretically, DeFi is not in any jurisdiction. Yeah, isn't that the great thing about it? Is that it's not permissioned. You can list any token on AMM that you want. You can leverage up to 1000x if you'd like. So yeah, my view on DeFi in relation to CeFi is that, in my opinion, with the rise of DeFi in the last 9 to 12 months, I think we'll see a clear bifurcation where exchanges like ours, little regional things, we'll be compliant, we'll play nice with the regulators and the banks, and we'll be the on-ramps for this world. And then it's you're off, right? In your own Wild West. And I think, whereas I think, CeFi platforms that were a bit more permissive, or I would say a bit more lax with regulatory concerns, maybe they'll find their space a bit more constrained going forward, especially if, what we were mentioning as, the smacking continues, right? I mean, I think the other shoe is yet to drop, to be perfectly honest. I mean, we saw last autumn the BIMX activity or the enforcement actions. We saw Ripple. I just can't imagine that's where it ends, right? So I do think sovereign authorities are going to be looking at this more closely. I think that, I don't know if we skipped over the CDBC topic, but I mean, that's a trend. I mean, sovereign entities are getting into this market, whether we like it or not. DeFi is going to be forever, I would say, a haven for that. And that's good. I think we all need our safe spaces. The guys that touch the physical world, I'd say, like us, then we'll do what we need to continue to operate.
Can you actually, before we get to Peter, can you touch upon what you're busy with at Maicoin, what they're doing in NFTs? I know you're doing a few of these things. Maybe let everyone know what's happening, because we can get involved.
Yeah, business is good. So I spend most of my day just trying to keep the wheels on or the lights on, whatever it is. We have a lot of Taiwan dollars. So what's different, I can tell you qualitatively about this time around versus last time around, was people buy the dip and they also chase on the way up. It's just buy. So I'm flooded essentially with Taiwan dollar liquidity. Some of it we match with local folks that want to sell, but a lot of it we have to source from abroad. And so I have a liquidity problem when it comes to, as you guys well know, the Taiwan dollar is a capital control currency. So I'm not at liberty to convert infinite amounts of Taiwan dollar into US dollar or any other dollar. And so that's what keeps me pretty busy these days, but it's a good problem, and it's a labor of love, I should suppose. I mean, so many aunties are coming to the shop and think, "Here's my $1,000,000 Taiwan dollar," and.
What are you doing to onboard them? Is there like a tutorial? Are they on YouTube?
Well, that's why
or
that's why we did the shop, right? They can see the place and have someone to talk to. We run some tutorials, but. They're willing to jump through these hoops for the most part. And so it's encouraging to see. So,
Peter, answers?
About Ethereum, ERC20s?
ERC20, Ethereum, other blockchains, generally DeFi.
Blockchains in general, I don't think there's just going to be one dominant blockchain. I think there'll probably be like 5 or 6. If I go back to the .com analogy, Yahoo was the big player initially in the first wave, 99, 2000, and then Google popped up. So technology is always changing on the technology angle. Ethereum to me is almost like a test net. It's slow. They're moving to Ethereum 2.0. That probably won't happen for 2 or 3 years. But all the developers on Ethereum right now, you've got like Cardano, Polkadot. You've got some other smart contract platforms that I think will do very well. I think overall the blockchain industry is not going to go away. I wouldn't say for absolute certainty that Bitcoin is the only game in town. I think there's a lot of technology and development that's happening, and I still think this is still very early innings in this long game.
Cool. So if there's no one else on the panel that has anything to add or questions, just let's open it up. I see a lot of smart people in the room. There's like Joe, there's Ray, Jim. Questions from the audience? Maybe you can come and speak into the microphone.
Touched upon it briefly there. We see this certain adoption of governments adopting digital currencies with their own, and you can potentially see some of the bigger governments each having their own digital currency. So I hear a lot of positivity around Bitcoin and Ethereum. But how do you think that affects the future of the dominant digital currencies now, when you have every major country having their own digital currency in the future?
I have a particular take on the notion of sovereign digital currencies. I think it's very clear why the People's Bank of China is doing what they're doing. China is, depending on the time, the number 1 or second largest holder of U.S. Treasury bills. And so money creation in the U.S. affects them negatively. And then number 2, they're also the subject of an increasing number of American financial sanctions. So wanting to internationalize the RMB and do it in a way that's resistant to American censorship, I think it makes all the sense for them. The Biden administration is kind of wringing their hands or their hair around this PBOC thing. I think they have probably less to worry about than they may think. And I base that observation on some guidance that came out of the OCC, which is under the U.S. Treasury, on January 4th of this year. I am not sure if it's some master plan, some awesome strategy coming out of Washington, or whether it's inadvertent. But this OCC finding, which opened the door for financial institutions in the U.S. to use stable coins for settlement, to me, it settles the question. Would you prefer to use some circumscribed version of the RMB or a US dollar that flows freely on any number of the 5 or 6 blockchains that Peter mentioned, right? I think the answer is obvious. And this move alone, I think, will cement the US dollar's role as the settlement currency for the foreseeable future. Does this ensure the power of the American government to censor or to sanction transactions? I'm not so sure of, because it's obviously harder to censor Ethereum than it is to censor SWIFT, right? But as far as settlement's concerned, the U.S. dollar is over 40% market share on the planet right now. I see that continuing. I don't think there's a lot to fear from the RMB in that regard. But perhaps with Palantir and Peter Thiel's help, maybe, Ethereum blockchain will become as tightly surveilled as, HSBC and Citi transactions. So if that's a technically solvable problem, that's the way it's going to get solved.
Well, I think with what you have with Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies in general is you have, part of it is a parallel financial system, but also, the role of gold in the past would be this non-counterparty risk store of value, and also a means of exchange if you could move it around. And I think Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies will kind of act in a similar fashion where they're not government tied, because right now you have fiat currencies which are closely tied to the governments with which they're issued. But you'll have this alternative. Like, I think Bitcoin will probably stay around for a while and will be something that you could have some value and still move around in the future.
I find the CBDC or the digital yuan very, very fascinating. Obviously, I think one of the many reasons that PBOC is doing this, right, is obviously it's what they've been doing with yuan for a while, which is trying to be the reserve currency of the world, eventually, right? I mean, the yuan is obviously making progress. They were introduced to IMF special drawing right basket many years back, and most of the commodities price is in US dollar. So I think it's a clear kind of ambition for the PBOC to try and overtake that, and starting with the digital yuan with that respect. I mean, most of us that have been in China would know that, there's really, it's 50%, more than 50% is cashless, right? Like, I don't even have a WeChat Pay or Alipay, and I'm looked down upon when I carry cash, right? Like, even like the stands, aunties, they don't even want to work with me or sell me stuff because I didn't have Alipay or WeChat Pay. But I think it's very clear that what they're trying to do from the party's perspective, from the government's perspective, the inherent nature of blockchain is everything's transparent, right? So obviously there's motives behind having this type of mechanism. But secondly, when one day, when I do believe that all assets can be digitized and will be digitized longer term, why would you not use a central bank backed currency versus a stable coin, which is technically not backed by the government? So you have the sovereign risk, which is relatively, based on the credit rating or however you want to determine that. But eventually in the future, the sovereign or CBDC will really be the predominant way of, transacting in the future, is my personal opinion. And that's also the reason why, the ECB, the Bank of England, BOJ, basically all the major central banks around the world are studying this. The Fed is as well. Just they're already said they're not going to be the first mover on this.
Yeah, I think with the digital yuan, I think China really wants this to happen for a lot of reasons that Alex already mentioned. I think, you see everything that's going on with a lot of the big companies in China, a lot of the big wealth. The Chinese government wants to rein this in. You see what's happening with Jack Ma and Alibaba. I think personally, to me, honestly, I think China would want nothing better than to cancel out all these middlemen like Alipay and WeChat and all that, and just have a digital yuan, because they basically control the whole system at that point. They know where the money is going, who has what, how it's being transacted. I mean, this is essentially what they've wanted all this time. And, China is also the only place where something like this could just happen immediately, because basically it's like, you want to pay for something, you want to use your money, it's digital yuan now. You have no other choice. So, like it or you don't spend. So, and for the other reasons that, Alex brought up, the sanctions that China has to deal with because of the U.S. banking system, the U.S. dollar, everything. This is even more incentive for them to try to make this to work, because then the U.S. loses a lot of leverage from U.S. dollar. They lose a lot of leverage from banking sanctions. And, I'm not saying it's going to replace U.S. dollar or anything like that, but you got a lot of other countries in this world where currencies are not stable. What if, and the whole talk is, with the Winter Olympics in China, like a lot of international countries will be coming. They want people to use the digital yuan, allow them to, use it with their own local currency, and then convert into digital yuan, and then you continue to use it when they go back home. And if you're from this country where, your currency can just be invalidated tomorrow, what if, you can have a digital yuan that you can feel safe with and it won't just disappear? I think China's really trying to push this agenda. And if they can be successful, I think it would have huge ramifications for the entire financial world.
I wanted to clarify. I agree with what the two gentlemen just said. What I was saying about the OCC's ruling around stable coins and how that's going to kind of cement the U.S. dollar settlement, that is not mutually exclusive with the PBOC's digital yuan succeeding within certain confines. And you saw right after the Alaska meetings between the two foreign ministers, right? The deal with he met the Russian foreign minister, and then there's this 25-year deal with Iran. So you see the outline forming, which is, within China's sphere of influence, this was going to be a huge success. They're going to settle petroleum purchases from Iran with this. Same thing with LNG purchases with Russia. They'll sell their stuff to these countries using digital yuan as well. But I think this, by the same token, the limited success that Chinese internet companies have had outside of China, there are a multitude of reasons we don't have to get into here, but I think for the same reasons that they're held back, the digital yuan will be held back outside of China's sphere of influence.
Thank you. We usually end by now, but we have a lot of more questions coming, and I'd really like Liz to come up.
I thought I was just coming to a happy hour, but these views are just my own. But I think on the CBDC question, I do think what's interesting is I do think it's really a data play, as you said. It's not necessarily about sort of democratizing flow of payments and so forth, because at the end of the day, if you think about it, today the way that we use money, it's already in a digital form, right? Like how many of us actually, carry suitcases of cash when we're transacting? It's almost never. And so, I do think with CBDCs, with China and other countries, you're still going to run into questions of capital controls, right? I'm sure the Chinese government is not going to let the digital yuan sort of, freely circulate and trade without controls that they currently have on the physical yuan. And so I do think, in terms of our industry and our, when we think about what is the potential of decentralized finance, what is the potential of digital tokens, there's still going to be a need for bridge currencies, right, between CBDCs. I can't imagine, even if a CBDC is compatible across multiple blockchains, you're still going to have an issue around. So if you have a digital yuan, if you're trying to spend that in Nigeria, essentially, do you have a merchant in Nigeria that's willing to accept that, right? And so you still need the bridge. You still need the bridge to convert to whatever digital token or fiat that your merchant in whatever your destination country is willing to accept. So I do think that I think there's a lot of hype around CBDCs, but I think at the end of the day, it goes back to what is it that sovereigns care about? How much control do they want? And I do think it's 100% a data play. Because right now, countries can track. And the reason I say it's a data play is because it's primarily on. Sorry, I've had like 3 glasses of wine.
We all have. It's okay.
Again, I thought I was coming to a happy hour.
It's a drinking discussion.
But I do think, at the end of the day, right, they want to know who's paying their taxes, right? Who's paying off in terms of corruption money. And then they also know sort of what are their citizens spending on, right? So I think when people talk about sort of CBDCs as like, oh, these countries are so open-minded, they're trying to, sort of be innovative, and they're trying to sort of democratize finance. I don't really see that. So.
You should believe that argument like you believe Facebook's argument, right? So nobody believes it. So,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's 100%. These views are my own.
It'll help with your social score also. It'll be part of your social score.
Cool. Does anyone want to add to that? If not, let's get the next question from Joe.
With the explosion of DeFi valuations, what's your view on how much of it is due to the intrinsic utility of these platforms versus intelligently crafted tokenomics? Because as we see some of these platforms start maturing, a lot of the, pump that's created by, the inflating these tokens is going to start to go away. And then project will start to be, as they become mature, they'll start being valued on, traditional finance metrics. And when we look at a lot of these popular tokens, a lot of them are solely governance tokens, whereas some actually have dividends where you can apply traditional finance metrics to value them. So do you guys have any thoughts on that?
I think we're in a pump and dump cycle. Like Dogecoin has no utility whatsoever, but I think it's done like a 400x. Right now you're just in a bull market. Bitcoin's the big dog, everything else kind of follows. And, everything's going to pump, everything's going to crash. It's just kind of the upward cycle, nothing goes in a smooth line. Everything goes, boom and then bust, boom and then bust. But, over a long period of time, it's an upward movement.
I mean, right now I'm literally seeing ICO 2.0 is from my seat. That's not to say that there are not reputable projects out there on trying to build a bridge, via decentralized finance. But it's also very evident to me that there are a lot of opportunistic projects out there offering, tokenomics, government tokens, sell that to investors, get listed on major exchanges, dump it on the first day, 10x, after 10x, 50x. This is very common practice right now. So invest with caution.
Yeah, let's have the next question. But do you have a question? Before we wanted to get there, I wanted to ask everyone to give some input on what should people be cautious of. We're all talking about crypto here, so maybe Peter, you can start with that.
I think of the coins that are out there right now, there's probably, 6,000. 99% of them are going to zero. So that gives you, 60? Long-term plays, but it's not much different than I keep going back to the .com era, but there were, the Dogecoin is probably the equivalent of pets.com. It's kind of a joke, but it pumped up and it dumped. So, this is just, again, history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And this is the cycle we're in right now.
In terms of caution, I think I kind of touched on it in terms of, if you want to be involved in the space, purchasing the cryptocurrency directly, that's one thing. But if you want to be involved from public markets, whether it be, through one of these vehicles like MSTR or GBTC or waiting for an ETF, I think I'd be cautious to understand, well, what exactly do they hold? What are you investing in? Is there a premium? Is there a discount? Why is there a premium? Why is there a discount? And I mean, even with ETFs, if any of you read, most of you probably know, The Big Short with Michael Burry and how he thinks ETFs are a bubble and things like this. So, There's a lot of questions to ask whether ETFs are valid tools to invest in, kind of the underlying. So I'd be cautious about, what exactly you're investing in if you're using a proxy such as stocks through the public markets for cryptocurrency.
All right. If there's one more question, we'll take another last question. We usually end by now and start on drinking. And I also want to say thank you to Mosi and Greentop for coming and helping out with the sound and stuff. But Dan, okay, come on.
One thing we're wondering as developers is like we like you guys already touched a little bit on this question, which is, so we have all these chains, and on Ethereum we have all these L2 technologies coming up right now that are.
Wait, this is Dan from Nexus Mutual. I forgot.
So from a developer perspective, and I guess from a product perspective, what do you guys think is going to happen in terms of like liquidity fragmentation because of these technologies, and how will that affect like products that are being released right now? So say you go on an L2 that eventually dies off, or you're picking one of these technologies that proves that it's not the right fit. And do you think Ethereum is going to have issues because of the way this is being released right now, like all of these L2 technologies released in sequence? Yeah.
That's a tech question. I'm not in this for the tech. I don't know anything about tech, honestly, but
I don't have a concrete answer for you, but you're a developer. I think you're the best wind vane that we have in this industry. Where's the mojo in your community, right? Which protocol are your peers kind of directing their energy at? I think that's probably the best indicator for which survives at the end. And since I've been involved with Ethereum, at least for the past 5 years, the answer has been Ethereum. Up until now, I don't know that will remain the case going forward. And so the moment you see large numbers of your peers abandon Ethereum for developing projects, then that's probably time for you to pack your bags as well, And by the same token, I mean, whichever new protocol is attracting large numbers of your peers probably deserves a good amount of your attention. But up until now, I don't see any other of the half a dozen, blockchains having, silver bullet fashion solved the problems that Ethereum is facing.
I kind of briefly touched upon it earlier, right? I mean, this is part of the headwinds, right? It's are we doing, should we build on Ethereum? Should we build on Polkadot? Okay, if it's Ethereum, you have layer 2, ZK rollup, is it Optimism, is it Omise, right? So all of these, options is actually a headwind for a developer like yourself, right? So, because everyone's kind of vying for market share, right? And they all kind of have their own kind of niche, pros and cons, right? So, I mean, ultimately, most of the chains will die, and there will be, top 4 or 5 will, basically concentrate at the top to really build upon and move forward.
Yeah, I'm just stretching. I've been replaying like the last 5 years of Ethereum in my head, right? I mean, when I got involved, it was around $1. It promptly shot up to 1,000 within 12 to 15 months, and then it tanked back at 100. People thought that was the end. I'm not sure why it's at $2,000 right now, to be perfectly honest. Like, is it DeFi? Is it the layer 2? I have no idea, honestly. All I'm trying to say is that, this journey is unavoidable, I think, for any developer community. And so just keeping it close to the metal, keep it real. I mean, like, just because you fork Ethereum doesn't mean you solve Ethereum's problems, right? So, yeah, I have still some faith. I'm biased, I should admit, but I still have some faith that the developer community around Ethereum will solve the issues that we're facing right now.
Yeah, we need to give a lot of the, inspiring dev community a lot of hope and push them to do and build very cool things for everyone's benefit. I just want to say thank you, Alex. You're such a busy guy. Thank you for coming here. Thank you, Ping, for pushing this through. Thank you for all the other speakers. I never thought that we would have such a global viewpoint here in Taiwan. I think, but because of COVID, there's been so many influx of talent and people that have relocated here. In the audience, I see a lot of new faces that I've never seen before. Thanks, William. So yeah, if there's not any other last remarks from our speakers, then let's start the drinking.